I remember the house before I remember the moment, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath long before any of us did. It was a wide white house on Maple Ridge Drive, in a quiet American town where people waved from their cars and pretended they knew each other's lives. I had worked hard to make that house feel settled. Every holiday, I polished the oak dining table until I could see my reflection in it. 12 chairs surrounded it, evenly spaced, each one matched, except for the chair at the head. That chair had history. It had been my father's, then my first husband's, and after he died, it stayed where it was, more symbol than furniture, waiting for a presence that felt right. That December evening, the house was filled. The windows glowed against the cold, and the scent of roasted meat and buttered vegetables lingered in the air. Laughter rose and fell in practiced rhythms. I moved between the kitchen and the dining room, adjusting plates, refilling glasses, and checking that everything looked the way it should. I wanted this night to feel normal. I wanted it to prove something, though I could never quite say what. My second husband, Daniel Wright, sat in that chair. Daniel was 53, with shoulders that had rounded slightly from years of labor and eyes that carried a permanent trace of tiredness. His hands were large and rough, the kind that showed their history without apology. He had paid for the roof over our heads, the heat that warmed the rooms, the food on the table, the holidays that came and went without question. He never demanded praise for it. He believed that showing up mattered more than being thanked. He believed love was something you demonstrated quietly over time. I had told myself that belief was enough. My son Ethan, from my first marriage, stood behind Daniel as we sat down to eat. Ethan was in his late 20s then, tall and restless, with a sharpness in his smile that made me uneasy even before that night. He had never hidden his resentment, not really. He tolerated Daniel the way one tolerates a necessary inconvenience. He accepted what Daniel provided, but not the man himself. I heard the sound before I understood it. The scrape of wood against hardwood, sudden and harsh. The chair lurched backward. Daniel's shoulders jerked as Ethan's hands pressed into them, not in play, not as a joke, but with force. "That seat belongs to my real dad," Ethan said. His voice was loud and clear, carrying across the table. There was a smile on his face, thin and satisfied, as if he had been waiting for this moment. The words landed heavy, final, impossible to laugh away. Daniel fell. The chair tipped, and he went down hard, one knee striking first, then his side. Gravy splashed across his shirt, dark and spreading. Plates rattled. A fork clattered to the floor. Conversation died in an instant. Every face around the table froze, caught between shock and something else that looked too much like relief. I did not speak. That silence was the loudest sound in the room. Daniel looked up at me from the floor. There was no anger in his eyes, no accusation. There was only a quiet searching, as if he were asking whether this was real, whether this was truly happening in the house he had built his life around. For a fraction of a second, I felt the weight of that question press into my chest. Then I reached for the napkins. I remember the absurdity of that choice even now. My hands moved automatically, dabbing at the spill on the floor, as if the mess mattered more than the man who had been pushed to it. I told myself I was keeping things from escalating. I told myself it was better not to make a scene. I told myself many things in that moment, all of them cowardly. Daniel stood slowly. He used the edge of the table to steady himself, his movements careful, controlled. His hand trembled just slightly before he tucked it back into himself. No one offered help. No one said his name. The chair lay on its side behind him, forgotten. He picked up his coat from the back of another chair and put it on without a word. He did not look at Ethan. He did not raise his voice. He simply walked toward the door, the sound of his shoes against the floor the only noise in the room. When the door closed behind him, something shifted. People began to breathe again. Someone laughed too loudly. Someone else reached for a drink. Ethan sat down in the chair that had thrown Daniel to the floor, leaning back as if he had claimed a prize. I stayed seated. I told myself I would talk to Daniel later. I told myself I would explain. I told myself this was a single moment, not a verdict. But even as those thoughts passed through me, I felt something else settle in their place. A cold recognition I did not yet dare to name. That night, after the dishes were done and the guests had gone, the house felt different. The rooms were too large, the silence too sharp. I stood alone in the dining room, staring at the head of the table. The chair was upright again, but it looked smaller somehow, stripped of the meaning I had forced onto it. I went to bed without calling Daniel. Lying there in the dark, I replayed the moment again and again. Not just the shove, not just the fall, but my own stillness. The way my voice had stayed trapped behind my teeth. The way I had chosen order over justice, appearance over loyalty. I told myself I was protecting my family, but the truth was simpler and uglier. I was protecting myself. That was the night I learned the difference between living with someone and standing beside them. After that night, Daniel did not come back to the house. He did not call to argue or to demand an apology. He simply packed what he needed and moved into a small rented place near the river, the kind of apartment people choose when they do not plan to stay long. One bedroom, narrow windows, second-hand furniture that carried the faint smell of other people's lives. The rent was £900 a month, converted from dollars because the landlord was European and stubborn about the terms. Daniel paid it without complaint, just as he had paid for everything else in his life. When people asked, I told them we needed space. I said we were working things out. I said it was temporary. I repeated those words so often that they began to sound true, even to me. I kept his side of the closet untouched. I left his coffee mug in the cabinet. I told myself that distance was a pause, not an ending. What I did not tell anyone was how quickly the quiet became permanent. Daniel stopped texting unless it was necessary. When he did come by to pick up mail or documents, he stayed near the door. He no longer sat at the table. He no longer lingered. The house that had once felt anchored by his presence now felt like a stage after the actors had gone home. 3 weeks after he moved out, something arrived that I did not expect and had never prepared myself to explain. A letter came to his new address from a financial office in Chicago. Thick paper. Official language. The kind of envelope people fear before they even open it. Inside was a loan statement for $240,000, approved and active, complete with payment schedules and transfer confirmations. The loan was in Daniel's name. His full name. His credit. His records. Everything was perfectly aligned, as if he had personally walked into the office and signed with confidence. Except he had done none of it. He had never authorized the loan. He had never seen the paperwork. He had never agreed to anything. The money had already moved. It had been transferred into an account I controlled. Ethan's name was on the digital co-signing section, attached through access he never should have had. Old passwords. Familiar answers to security questions. Pieces of Daniel's life that had been close enough to touch for years. When Daniel called me, his voice was steady. That alone terrified me more than shouting ever could. He asked if I knew anything about the loan. I said yes. At first, I framed it carefully. I said it was for renovations, for improving the house, for protecting our future. I said the timing had been complicated. I said I planned to tell him once things settled. Ethan stood behind me while I spoke, arms crossed, listening without expression. I told myself that families do these things, that money moves differently inside marriages, that intentions matter more than methods. I told myself so many things that night that I lost track of which ones I actually believed. Daniel came to the house the next day. He sat on the edge of the couch, not leaning back, not getting comfortable. He listened while I cried. I let the tears come easily, letting them do the work words could not. I told him it was a misunderstanding. I said the money would be paid back. I said it had never been meant to hurt him. He watched me the way he had watched me from the floor that night. Quiet. Studying. As if he were measuring not my words, but the space between them. When I finished speaking, there was a long silence. Then he said something that cut deeper than any accusation. I was never family, he said. I was infrastructure. The word landed heavily in the room. Infrastructure. Something you use. Something you rely on without acknowledging. Something that only becomes visible when it fails. I tried to argue. I told him that it was unfair. I told him he was exaggerating. I told him he mattered. He did not respond. He simply stood, adjusted his coat, and walked out again. After that, everything changed, though slowly enough that I did not recognize it at first. Daniel stopped trying to protect us. He stopped smoothing things over. He stopped carrying the weight silently. He began asking questions. He requested copies of documents. He reviewed timelines. He traced transactions. He spoke to people whose job it was to care about signatures and consent. He did not threaten. He did not raise his voice. He did not demand anything from me. He chose clarity. Ethan grew angry when he realized Daniel was not going to cover for us. He called Daniel ungrateful. He said the money was deserved. He said it was nothing compared to what Daniel owed us for years of being tolerated rather than loved. I listened to those words and felt something break inside me. Not because they were cruel, but because they were honest. Daniel had been tolerated, accepted only as long as he provided, needed, but never truly welcomed. One evening, alone in the house, I opened my banking app and stared at the numbers. The balance looked reassuring, solid, earned. But now I could see it differently. I could see the fingerprints all over it. The shortcuts. The assumptions. The quiet belief that Daniel's name was something we could borrow without asking. I thought about the night he fell. About the way I reached for napkins instead of his hand. About how easy it had been to let him absorb the impact so the room could stay calm. This was the same thing, only larger. We had pushed him again, just more quietly. When Daniel finally told me he was going to report the loan as fraud, I felt fear rise in my chest, sharp and immediate. I begged him not to. I told him it would destroy the family. I told him it would ruin Ethan's future. I told him we could fix it privately. He listened. He always listened. Then he shook his head. I already lost my future here, he said. I am not losing my name, too. That was when I understood that the man who had paid for everything except the bill had paid in silence. Daniel did not protect us. I keep returning to that sentence because it explains everything that followed. For years, he had been the one who absorbed discomfort so others could remain comfortable. He paid quietly. He apologized first. He smoothed edges and filled gaps and made it easier for the rest of us to pretend that nothing was wrong. When he stopped doing that, the truth had room to stand up. He told the truth. He filed reports with a calm precision that felt almost surgical. He brought documents that traced the path of the money in clean, unbroken lines. He showed timelines that did not bend to emotion or intention. He named names, including mine, without hesitation or cruelty. He did not frame it as betrayal or revenge. He framed it as fact. I watched it happen from a distance at first, convincing myself that it would blow over. I told myself that systems moved slowly, that paperwork got lost, that explanations softened outcomes. I told myself this because I needed to believe that consequences were negotiable. They were not. When money crosses borders and paperwork lies, systems wake up. The language changed quickly. Letters arrived with heavier envelopes and firmer wording. Calls came from people who spoke in careful tones and took notes while I talked myself in circles. My accounts were frozen without warning. Cards declined. Automatic payments failed. The house, the same house I had once guarded with silence, went into review. Ethan reacted the way I expected. He raged. He blamed Daniel. He blamed me for not stopping him. He blamed a world that had finally noticed behavior it had ignored for too long. He could not understand why loyalty did not outweigh legality, why intention did not cancel impact. Then came the charges. Seeing my son's name attached to legal language made my hands shake. I read the words again and again, as if repetition might change their meaning. They did not. The story we had told ourselves about necessity and entitlement had no place in those documents. Only actions did. Friends stopped calling. At first it was subtle. Messages went unanswered. Invitations stopped arriving. Then it became obvious. People crossed the street to avoid conversation. Others offered brief looks of pity before looking away. Our social circle shrank to the size of our accountability. My sister from Europe sent one message. It was short, formal, and distant. She asked how it had come to this, as if the answer might fit into a single explanation. I did not reply. I did not know how to compress years of quiet choices into a few sentences. The hearings began in a building that smelled faintly of paper and old polish. I sat on hard benches, my back straight, my hands folded, trying to look composed. Daniel arrived early, every time. Pressed shirt, clean shoes, hair neatly combed. He never looked rushed or flustered. He greeted officials politely. He answered questions plainly. He never raised his voice. That was what unsettled me the most. There was no anger for anyone to point to, no outburst to dismiss as emotional. He did not dramatize. He did not embellish. He simply corrected the record. I watched him speak about the loan the way someone might speak about a broken appliance. Clear, precise, unsentimental. He explained what he had not signed. He explained how access had been misused. He explained when he discovered it and what he did next. Each sentence landed with quiet finality. He did not look at me while he spoke. I wanted him to. I wanted some sign that I still existed in his field of vision as more than a line item. When the opportunity came for me to speak, I stood with shaking legs and said his name. I apologized. I said I was sorry in every way I could think of. I spoke about confusion, fear, and poor judgment. I tried to sound sincere without sounding desperate. He did not turn his head. That hurt more than the verdict ever could. The outcome unfolded in stages. Restrictions, conditions, consequences that did not bend around family ties. The house was no longer mine in the way I had believed it was. Ownership became provisional, subject to review and repayment. Stability revealed itself as something I had rented with someone else's name. Ethan's future narrowed. The confidence he had carried like armor began to crack. I saw flashes of fear beneath the anger, moments when he seemed smaller, younger, unsure. I wanted to reach for him, to fix what I had helped break, but there were limits now. Some boundaries did not move simply because I wished them to. Daniel never gloated. He never sought to humiliate us the way he had been humiliated. He did not celebrate. When asked what he wanted, he said the same thing every time. I want my name returned to me. There was something devastatingly simple about that. As the process continued, I began to see the past differently. Moments I had dismissed as minor revealed their weight. Jokes I had laughed off now sounded cruel. Silences I had defended now felt complicit. I realized that respect does not erode all at once. It wears away quietly, with every excuse you make for someone else's behavior and every time you ask another person to endure discomfort for the sake of peace. I had asked Daniel to endure for years. Now the cost was being paid, and it was not him paying it. When the final decisions were announced, there was no dramatic scene. No shouting. No collapse. People gathered their papers. Chairs scraped. Doors opened and closed. Life moved forward with an indifference that felt almost insulting. Daniel left without looking back. I stayed seated for a long time after the room emptied, staring at the spot where he had stood. I understood then that apologies mean nothing without accountability, and that silence, once chosen, has a way of echoing until it becomes impossible to ignore. Truth had been louder than my apologies, and for the first time, I had no one else to blame for hearing it. The house is gone now, and I still sometimes reach for it in my memory as if it were standing just a few streets away. It was sold after months of paperwork, assessments, and quiet inspections by strangers who walked through rooms that once felt sacred to me. When the final papers were signed, I did not cry. I felt hollow instead, like a place that had been emptied so thoroughly that even echoes struggled to remain. Losing the house was not the punishment I feared. It was the consequence I had avoided imagining. I live in a smaller place now, on the edge of town, where the streets are narrower and the nights are quieter. The apartment has 2 rooms, plain walls, and windows that face a parking lot instead of a yard. I work again, not because I want to prove anything, but because structure has become a form of honesty. I cook for one. Simple meals. Nothing elaborate. I clean as I go. I sit with myself in the evenings and let the silence exist, without trying to fill it. Silence feels different when it is earned instead of chosen out of fear. At first, it was unbearable. I had spent years avoiding it, covering it with noise, guests, obligations, and distractions. Now it sits with me at the table. It watches me make coffee. It follows me into bed. Over time, I learned that silence is not empty. It is observant. It reflects what you have avoided hearing. I often think about Daniel, though I no longer search for updates the way I once did. I heard through someone else that he bought a modest home near the coast. Nothing extravagant. Paid in full. No shared names. No shared signatures. Just his. That detail mattered more than the location. For the first time, his life belonged entirely to him. I do not know if he is happy.
I do not know if he thinks of me.
I do know that he reclaimed something essential, something I helped take from him, without ever admitting it out loud. His name. His authority over his own life. His right to say no without being punished for it. Ethan no longer lives with me. The distance between us grew naturally after everything settled, like a crack widening in slow motion. We speak occasionally, carefully, circling topics instead of addressing them directly. There is regret in his voice sometimes, though it is tangled with defensiveness and loss. I do not know if he understands the full weight of what happened. I am no longer sure it is my place to teach him. What I have learned instead is how easily love becomes conditional when comfort is at stake. How quickly people learn to justify harm when it benefits them. How silence, repeated often enough, turns into permission. Sometimes I think about the chair. Not just the one at the head of the table, but everything it represented. Power. Belonging. Authority. We treated it like a symbol instead of a seat. We believed ownership could be inherited by force or sentiment rather than earned through respect. That night, when Daniel was pushed from it, I told myself it was about keeping the peace. Now I know it was about preserving an illusion that had already begun to rot. I replay that moment differently now. I imagine myself standing, saying his name, taking his hand, refusing to let the room decide what was acceptable. That version of me did not exist then. I was too invested in appearances, too afraid of disruption. It is strange how dignity works. You only notice its absence once it has been stripped away, and by then, the damage is already done. I have spent many evenings asking myself where the line was crossed. It would be comforting to point to the loan, the signatures, the money. But the truth is older than that. It began with small allowances. With laughter where there should have been correction. With silence where there should have been defense. Betrayal is rarely sudden. It is rehearsed. I am not writing this story to absolve myself. I carry my share of responsibility, and I no longer pretend otherwise. I write it because forgetting would be easier, and easy forgetting is how it all began. There is a kind of freedom that comes with accountability. It is not pleasant, but it is clean. I no longer have to defend choices that did not deserve defense. I no longer have to explain away harm by calling it a misunderstanding. I see myself more clearly now, and that clarity, though painful, is grounding. Respect does not grow where someone's name is borrowed, their money assumed, and their dignity negotiable. It cannot survive in a space where one person is expected to absorb humiliation so others can remain comfortable. Love built on silence is not love at all. It is convenient. Some nights, I set the table for one and pause before sitting down. I think about how many meals we shared without truly seeing each other. How many moments I chose calm over courage. I let the thought pass, then I sit. I tell the story because silence is how it started. And truth, spoken without decoration or excuse, is how it ended. What remains now is smaller, quieter, and more honest. And for the first time, that feels like enough.